This conference is going to focus on commercialization. And so our moderator is Billy Cohen, who's the Vice President for Johnson & Johnson Medical Device Companies. He's also the Director of the new Center for Device Innovation in the Texas Med Center, and this is just down the street on Holcomb in Maine. He's also a professor of surgery at Baylor College of Medicine. I won't read his long list of accomplishments and bio. It's in the book.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thanks. Anna Maiques told me I had the great pleasure of moderating this session, and I feel honored to get to do so. So there are 4 speakers in this session. The first is Anna Maiques, and she's going to talk about neuroelectronics, personalized brain therapy, using neurotechnology to create the future of healthcare, electroencephalogram, and non-invasive stimulation for brain disorders. And I can't wait to hear what you've got to say, and go.
So thanks, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. This was my first time in Houston. As you can tell by my accent, I'm from Barcelona, and I moved 4 years ago from wonderful Barcelona to wonderful but super cold Boston. So I've heard a lot about Houston, and I was very happy that Rafael invited me, and I thank him for, Rice University. So I'm very, very happy to have come to Houston, and thanks for giving me this opportunity. So I'm the CEO and founder of Neuroelectrics. And in these 2 days, we've heard a lot about the academy, the research in bioelectronics. I think that today I want to give you a view of what does it take to commercialize these technologies, and how hard it is, and what entrepreneurs have to do to demonstrate that this can be a new therapy. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about what we want to do, which is personalized brain therapy using non-invasive brain stimulation. How does it work? And then what are the clinical programs we are investing in? And then I want to go and look into the future. I can tell you other non-medical uses of the technology that are being used right there, right now, so that you can have a sense of how these technologies may impact our lives in the not so far future. So bad news, 1 out of 5 in this room is going to develop a brain disorder. And the bad news also is that there is no cure for a lot of them, or drugs are not fully working. The good news is that innovators like me and bioelectronics people like you and the academy is developing new technologies to face these challenges. So what we are doing at Neuroelectrics is really using EEG, non-invasive brain stimulation, and then artificial intelligence and machine learning to really try to do read and write over the brain. And I think that the beautiful thing that I'm going to show now, this hasn't been done these days, is now you're going to really see what is a non-invasive brain stimulation device look this. So this is 8 channels of EEG and transcranial current stimulation device. We have up to only 32 electrodes. They go over the scalp. We usually use gel, but we also have dry sensors for EEG. You cannot stimulate without gel, so you need to put gel under this electrode. So with this technology, you can actually go home, it's wireless, or out of the lab, and I'm going to show you in real time my brain right now. Wait a moment, let me see. So this is my EEG right now. And if I move my head, you can see there is an accelerometer built into the technology, which means that if you're telling your patient not to do the dishes, you're going to track that into the device at home. There is the classical spectrogram on EEG. This is a power spectrum or representation of my EEG in real time. And EEG is a technology that has been there for a long time, so we didn't invent it. We just made it a bit nicer, more wireless, easy to use, some dry electrodes, no big deal. What I'm very proud of is that on top of using these electrodes to collect brain data, we can use the same electrodes to inject very low currents into the brain. And remember, we have up to 32, which means we can, for the first time, stimulate networks in the brain. We can excite or inhibit different areas of the brain. And how do we know where to stimulate, which was a question that was raised during the, it's upside down, my brain now. So this is a mathematical model that based on the number of electrodes that you choose and the currents tells you what area of the brain you're excited on inhibiting. And TDCS will never be as precise as TMS or DBS, right? So it's kind of like, we are not getting like to the super millimeter. You're affecting larger areas. But I think that this technology like mine can help to really guide the stimulation with these mathematical models much better than the two huge sponges that are just shunting current from one hemisphere to the other, right? So I think that there is a lot of know-how in how to decide, where to stimulate and what not to stimulate. And let me give you some examples on how we are doing this. So before I go into stimulation, one of the things that I really like is EEG. So I think EEG, with the new machine learning tools we have, I think is super underused. I think that MRI took all the credit, and I think there is a lot to do in EEG. So we reached out to the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and we analyzed data from 118 patients that had an EEG 8 years before they developed Parkinson's because they had a sleep disorder called RBD. So we knew these patients were tracked during 8 years. So we knew which patients would have Lewy body, Parkinson's disease, healthy controls, or stay with the sleep disorder. So we applied machine learning to this data set, which was collected in Montreal at Sacré-Cœur in Canada. And we were able to classify really well which of those patients, based on that EEG, were going to develop Parkinson's disease. So it's only 118, so I think it's a very small sample, but still you can see the difference in the power spectrum of EEG using machine learning between the Lewy body, which is the blue line, Parkinson's, sleep disorder, the RBD, and the healthy controls. So now we are doing 750 patients with the same algorithms in 7 countries, thanks to the Michael J. Fox Foundation. So I think that it would be really nice if the research community would also be developing new biomarkers based on EEG. So moving to electrical stimulation. So I'm fascinated. Did you know that in the Romans and in the Greek times, they were already using electric fish to deal with pain? Pretty amazing, right? They had pain and they just got a ray fish or an eel to deal with pain. So I'm not that innovative. This has been out there for a long time. And we have been discussing about ECT and other technologies. What we are using is called transcranial current stimulation. A lot of people think of it as transcranial direct current stimulation, but there are other forms like alternating current or random noise. So there are different kinds of currents. Normally it's 20 to 40 minute session, and it's very low, no more than 2 milliamps normally per channel. So this field got, I think, a lot of attention after year 2000 when a group in Germany, Walter Paulus, demonstrated that there were really motor excitatory changes with these low currents into the brain. And then the whole field just went up like crazy. And I do agree with Hank, that there has been a lot of noise. So people started to use transcranial direct stimulation for everything and doing a bit of the hype that is going to cure every disease and is going to help us to be, brain enhancement, cure all diseases. So I agree there has been a lot of hype in the field and not a lot of reproducibility. Only the good results were published, small studies. But as a company, when we saw all these results, we decided that we had to do something about it. So as an entrepreneur, we took the decision not to go consumer because we think that the technology is not ready for prime time in the consumer space. Other entrepreneurs have decided to go consumer. So that's a path that you choose. So we decided to go to the clinical path. And for an entrepreneur, for the students that want to be entrepreneurs in bioelectronics, I think there are a lot of things you need to do. You need to get regulatory approval, so you need to talk to the FDA. You need to get reimbursement. You need to get a good commercial strategy. So the science and the technology is the first step, but there is still a long way to go, So we reached out to the FDA because we saw that there was a lot of evidence in the epilepsy space. Also, the EEG is a valid diagnostic for epilepsy. So we thought that this read and write would make sense in epilepsy. And we reached out to the FDA with the preliminary data. There are animal models, in vivo models on epilepsy and transcranial stimulation. And with Dr. Rothenberg at Boston Children's and Beth Israel, we designed a clinical trial. Why? Out of the 50 million of patients with epilepsy in the world, 1/3 don't respond to medication. This means that if you have a kid with epilepsy, it's either an implanted device or surgery to remove the part of the brain that is causing the seizures. So the trial that we started last year, approved as an IDE by the FDA, is 2 months of baseline seizure detection, 10 days of stimulation, so 10 days of 20 minutes every day, and then 2 months of follow-up. So the endpoint for the FDA is 40% seizure reduction. So versus baseline, we have to achieve this 40% seizure reduction. And how are we doing this? So the doctors at Boston Children's are sending us an MRI and an EEG for each particular patient. We need the epilepsy to be focal. We need to know where the focus is. For example, we stimulated one patient on one side, and I think it was misdiagnosed, and it has 2 focus, and we didn't have any impact. So I think that it's important to know patients that are well diagnosed with a focal epilepsy. With this MRI and EEG, we personalize this treatment with the software that I have shown, and then we provide the treatment. We even told the FDA that we wanted to do craniotomy patients, and it was a safety issue, so we had a long discussion with the FDA. And at the end, they agree, and we have modeled the currents to account for either skull defects or titanium implants, right? So again, I think that's what I mean by personalized, brain therapy, is taking into account what patients you are stimulating and how is the desire. So this week, we presented these results at the American Epilepsy Society in New Orleans. This was 2 days ago. And the results are really nice because we have done 20 patients. We have 100 more to go. So the pivotal is going to be 100 in 4 sites in the United States. But we achieve, as you can see, F1, F2, and F3 are 4 weeks follow-up periods. And during TCS is 10 days of stimulation. So our endpoint was 40%. We achieved 60% on the first period, first weeks, and then going down. So this is a treatment that will require the patients to come back to the hospital after 8 weeks. And, but we are very happy because if we enter the pivotal now and we sustain these results, we will become the first ever TDCS approved device in the United States for one pathology. So, we'll see. A pivotal is a big study, and you cannot unblind the data, until it's finished. But with this data, we feel pretty confident that we can meet the endpoints. And then we had a lot of very good feedback from the patients and the doctors. So it's really safe technology. We didn't induce seizures. The currents are too low. And we had anecdotal data. One patient had the first seizure-free day in 10 years. It's well, it's kind of interesting, right? And then we had mothers, and that's an ethical issue. A lot of patients were calling me to buy devices, and I said, no, I'm not selling a device to you. You have to wait until the FDA clears. I said, why do I have to wait 1.5 years when my kid, or 2 years, when my kid is having seizures every day? And that's a strong ethical question, It's that you need, then you have to tell your patients, I'm sorry, we cannot do anything about it. You have to wait. So I think epilepsy is a very good indication, and I hope, fingers crossed, that we are successful. Other areas we are working is the aging brain. So there was a paper at the Harvard Institute of Aging talking about dual tasking. So what we did is, you put elderly patients or demented patients in a scale, and you make them do a cognitive task, which is count backwards, and they start to lose sway. So you measure, this balance deficit because they are doing a dual task, and then you stimulate them for 20 minutes and do again this test. So we reached out to Harvard, and we have done now 48 subjects using this protocol of dual tasking and stimulating them. And we are unblinding the data now. So if the data is good, which we think it is, we will go to the FDA and tell the FDA, with this data, can we do a clinical trial for early dementia patients? So that's what we are investing in at the company. And the idea is that these technologies will be used home. So for the innovators, in bioelectronics, invasive is more hard, but for non-invasive devices, what does it take to take a technology from the hospital to home, right? And I think that there is a lot of questions on reimbursement, business models, but I think it's the future of healthcare. It's really moving the interventions from the hospital to the home, right? And that's why we have built a cloud therapy and so on to sustain this. So I am finished now with the medical part of what we are doing, and I will be happy to answer questions. But what other uses of the technology are doing, people are doing with this? So one beautiful MIT wants to do a case on us because I haven't raised any capital until now. And you will say, well, how can you have a 40-people company, don't raise any capital? And it's interesting because I told my team, listen, instead of raising capital, why don't we sell these devices to the research community and the hospitals worldwide as a tool, without any given application? I think it's an interesting model for entrepreneurs. Instead of waiting to have the perfect application and the perfect market, do you have something in between that you can start to put out there, right? And we were super successful. So last year, we made more than $4.5 million in selling devices worldwide. So we have a whole network of distributors and vendors. We have customer support, the manufacturer to license medical devices. And some of the people that are buying from us, one of the reasons to be in Boston is that a lot of the people that were buying were from the Boston area. But we have people like Pasquale Leone, who is a TMS expert doing depression and neurodegenerative diseases. We have Adam Gazzale at UCSF, who is combining EEG and stimulation with video games. We have Emery Brown, who is doing anesthesia. Can you create a new paradigm in anesthesia, doing it dynamically with EEG? Learning disabilities, stroke recovery, brain-computer interfaces. But beyond academics, I can tell you that we have Warner Bros., Facebook, Oculus, people beyond the academic world getting super interested in this neurotech, both EEG and stimulation. So we have to start to think what is going to happen with the virtual reality sets will come integrated with EEG, or neuromarketing, Unilever, Warner Bros. They are all using these tools as a way to understand how to sell better, right? NASA is measuring fatigue in pilots using our technology, or the US Army. We have a number, and Doug knows that, a number of projects for cognitive enhancement by the US military. So there was a lot of effort in the last years in trying to help in cognitive enhancement. Other examples I really like is, for example, this one. It's a research project that it's been done in Barcelona, but they are helping spinal cord injured patients who have neuropathic pain. And what they are doing is coupling stimulation at the motor cortex with mirror therapy. Mirror therapy is a very well-known therapy for neuropathic pain. So at the time that the patient is seeing the legs in movement, they are stimulating the motor cortex. And they are getting much better from their pain, So it's a research project, but I think it's beautiful. Another one, it's, brain-computer interfaces. We know Elon Musk and all these people are working in brain-computer interfaces. I really like the non-invasive part much better. This is an example of a robotic arm being controlled with dry electrodes using our technology. And what the patient is doing is opening and closing, this part using non-invasive brain-computer interfaces. I also have to say that brain-computer interfaces are not very easy to do, and it requires training. So people think that you just put a cap and you can control something, and it just, I don't think it's so easy to do. Another area that I think is fascinating is video games and virtual reality. So I don't know if you know Akili. Akili is a company founded by Adam Gazzale in Boston. They are in the FDA route to approve a video game as the first ADHD intervention. So if you have a kid with ADHD, they will prescribe a video game. Pretty awesome, right? So I think that in healthcare, I'm in contact with entrepreneurs. I think that the silos of drugs, devices, video games are going to be broken. And we are going to see the future of healthcare with much more creative interventions that go through the FDA. Another case which is a bit of a controversy, and there is some ethical issues here, is Professor Kadosh in Oxford became pretty well known for doing learning kids with dyscalculia, which is mathematical disabilities, stimulate them and then get better. So what are the neuroethics of stimulating people with learning disabilities? I mean, if you think of a classroom, who is going to have access in the future if this goes forward, right? And how are we going to regulate this? So this is, I think, a very interesting example and why I love to be involved in the neuroethics debates. Other nice examples, and you can see in the website, is we have an architect, Refik Anadol, who is an artist, who recorded EEG from people telling them to recall nice memories. And then he made a huge installation of the EEG represented as a melting memory. It's a beautiful installation, so I recommend you to look at that. So bottom line, I think we are in a convergence of digital technology, neuroscience, and we are going to see more and more technologies coming up. In fact, there is consumer TDCS applications out there, and Hank already mentioned this yesterday. So you can now go online and buy a Halo device, a GoFlow, and do transcranial stimulation for consumer. So before I close, I also, looking into the future, I want to just refer to a paper we wrote in 2015, my company with Dr. Pascual Leon in Harvard. So what we did is, we had a guy in India with an EEG, and we made him think you move your hands or you move your feet. And that created a motor potential that we translate as 0 and 1. Then we had a guy in France with a TMS robotic coil that would stimulate the occipital area and make them see phosphines. Phosphines were described yesterday in another talk, right? So if the computer would understand that there was a hands, an EEG hands, it will create stimulation at the motor cortex, at the occipital cortex. So at the end, they will have a like perception. So sending these 1 and 0s, we were able to transmit for the first time brain-to-brain communication data without any. It's a very silly experiment because it's not mind reading or anything, so it's pretty simple, but it's a clear case on how you transmit words. We did hello and ciao by a beacon code 1010, but it is possible today in this simple manner to transmit brain-to-brain communication. And the future may be like Christopher Walken in Brainstorm, I don't know. But I think that for the people working in bioelectronics, it's kind of really interesting to look forward and start to think of what are the implications of the things we are developing and how are we going to be ahead of time. So as a summary, since the Egyptians, we have advanced a lot in terms of technology. We are moving to the clinical field, and the future we'll see, how exciting it can be. And I just want to close by thanking Houston and, the wonderful time we had last night, but also during the conference. So it has been a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you.
I guess we'll take some questions. I want to congratulate you on getting this far without having to raise money and just earning money. And the people that buy this use it just for
research.
EEGs.
Or stimulation in research.
So other people are stimulating as well?
Yes, but I don't sell any device without an IRB approval. So I need to know that you have the approval to do research with my device. Otherwise, I do not sell it.
I see. And I take exception to the fact that you call attention deficit disorder a disease. I think it's a superpower. Are there any questions from the audience?
No.
Sure, I have a question. So congratulations, Anna, on the success of the epilepsy trial. Looks like it's off to a great start. I'm very curious about the mechanism, though. TDCS is often used to promote excitability in the brain, but it would seem in the case of epilepsy, you want to do the reverse. What, if anything, is known about the effects of TDCS on excitability in someone with epilepsy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we know Alex has some animal models and some slices in vivo models. So what we do is like we inject, let's say, cathodal inhibitory current. So when people think about stimulation, they usually think about excitatory. But the way you place the electrodes, you can do cathodal stimulation, which is what we are doing in the case of epilepsy to kind of reduce the threshold and create this inhibitory. And the mechanism of action is know that you're kind of like polarizing or helping the membranes to have less likelihood of firing or more inhibitory. And if you do this day after day, there is some plastic effects and some after effects. That's why one session of stimulation, I don't think it does much. You need at least 5 to 10. And that's why you see that during the stimulation, the effects are not as big as after 4 weeks because there is this build-up kind of effect. So I think it's pretty different than TMS in terms of the mechanism of action.
So a follow-up question to that: if the mode of action, if it's decreasing the level of neural activity, have you looked at side effects on cognitive function? So you've stopped the seizures, but have you caused any reduction in other cognitive ability in these patients?
Well, the FDA asked us to do some quality of life measures, so we are doing a couple of NIH toolbox cognitive assessments. So we haven't perceived any cognitive decline on that or cognitive bias. So we haven't until this point. I mean, some patients reported like different mood. The adult population, like the capacity to focus better at work, but I think that we only have 20 patients, and it's early to say, right?
How does it have a cumulative effect over time? Are you depleting neurotransmitters? Are you changing membrane potentials?
We are changing membrane potentials. That's what we are doing.
Yes.
So congratulations. Looks exciting. 2 FDA-related questions. What's your timetable?
So now we are starting the pivotal. It's going to be 100 patients in Miami, Chicago, Boston, and New York. So around 30 patients per site. And they will be randomized, double Armstrong control. So I think that it will take us, the protocol is rather short because if you think about it, it's 2 months of baseline, 10 days intervention, 2 months of, follow-up. But I think it will take us around 1.5 years at least to complete the study.
And what subset of epileptic patients are you looking after? Are you recruiting?
So we are recruiting 9 years and older. Mm-hmm. They have to fail at least 2 or 3 medications, being 2 or 3 medications, and they are usually candidates for surgery, and they are focal refractory patients. Now we include the failed surgery patients as well, but it really has to be focal, neocortical kind of epilepsy.
Are they mainly relatively young people?
No, we had from 9-year-olds to 55-year-olds. So there was, and
They're 55,
young
Anna. They're
people, sorry,
relatively young.
And then we had, there is some variability there because we had people, at least they have to have, I think it's 5 seizures per week. That's the minimum inclusion criteria. But we had people having 15 seizures per week, right? So there is some, and we don't have enough data to tell you, if there are statistical differences between, the different groups, right? So we'll have to work on that.
So last question, it's a technical FDA question, and maybe you already said this and I just missed it. Are you going the full PMA route or 510K?
So somebody talked yesterday about 510K. Like my
That was me.
Yeah, so like my EEG device is 510K. Why? Because there are other EEG devices there. So I go to the FDA and I say, my device does the same thing that the other guy, right? But in transcranial current stimulation, there is no device approved in the United States, so we have to go to either PMA or de novo. Yeah. I do believe it will be a de novo path, but it will still require a full, clinical trial.
So I don't know whether I think this should have been cleared, but the Fisher-Wallace electrical stimulator does have FDA clearance. You can't use that as a predicate?
That's a very good question. When we came to the US, we thought, can we 510K Fisher-Wallace? Because, imagine the amount of headache and trouble you save. And our advisors on regulatory said, no, you shouldn't, because this was approved in the 60s. Yeah. the wave that they're injecting is not really direct current specifically. It's a different kind of waveform. And they think that in the reclassification of the FDA, they may get in trouble at some point. So if you 510K them now, you may be out of the game, so.
Yeah, I think staying away from Fisher-Wallace probably makes some sense. They had this weird advertising campaign with people with all sorts of piercings and tattoos and things talking about how wonderful their stimulator was. You probably don't want to be there.
Yeah, that's one thing we have also talked with Hank, is like entrepreneurs. I mean, I sleep well at night because I know the FDA is watching me. Then reimbursement, CMS, will have to watch me. So a lot of people are watching me. So I don't have a lot of freedom, right? But that doesn't mean that, for example, in the marketing, entrepreneurs out there, you cannot just claim in your website false claim. You just cannot fool people. So there is some ethics on, some of these consumer companies, they say they go consumer, but some of the claims they make in their website is like, it's like, I start consumer, but I want to go to medical through the back door, right? So I think you cannot do that. And the Federal Trade Association, the consumer organizations, like in the case of Lumosity, they can fine you if you make false claims. So it's not legal to fool, your potential patients out there.
So I said that was my last question, but I lied. But this is my last question. So with 9 and up, 9 or more seizures a week, resistant to drug therapy, how big a U.S. market do you have?
So there are 7 million patients in the US, and 1/3 are refractory to medication. Of course, lots of them will go through surgery, right? Because you can cure them with surgery.
Right.
And you cannot with my device, right? But we still think that, in our numbers, the first population we are targeting is, I think, 18,000 patients. And we want to price this as a drug, which is kind of interesting. So I don't want to sell devices to patients. I want the doctor to prescribe them home use and charge them per month. For example, Keppra is $750 per month as a drug, right? So I really want this to be a subscription base. So it's again device as a subscription, which I think that is an interesting model. And we are discussing with CMS and other payers, like, can we convince them to prescribe 6 months of stimulation instead of $100,000 surgery, and see how patients respond? So that's what we are discussing with them.
Interesting. Good luck.
Yeah, that's a hard part. I think it's harder than the FDA, the reimbursement.
If your device works, people will figure out a way to use it.
Well, that's what people say, but I'm not sure it's totally true, because the dynamics of the payers don't, FDA and payers, I think they have different dynamics.
True.
So I'll tell you.
All right, thank you very much. Fantastic.